Hi there, and welcome to another episode of 411 Pop Culture, where real people talk about really everything. I'm your host, Justin Steele. With me is my co-host, Danielle Almendra. How you doing tonight, Danielle?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. Well, we are really excited. We're going to talk about more V.C. Andrews theory videos. Tonight, we're moving over to the Castile series, and we're going to talk about who was Heaven's true love. I would argue, of course, with the main candidates being Logan and Troy, so it probably really will be a Logan versus Troy episode. But before we were talking, Danielle kind of pointed out something that I think is actually the most accurate, but we'll talk about that at the end. But as always, if you like what you're seeing, please comment below. We want to know what you think as well. And if you really like it, give us a subscribe. Hit that little subscribe button. But tonight, so let's get into it. Throughout the series, Heaven, we start off, she is in love with Logan. He is her childhood sweetheart. After what happens with Cal and Kitty, Logan is turned off from Heaven, and she ends up trying to go to her grandparents' house, where she meets Tony and Jillian, and then finally meets Troy. Now, once Troy and Heaven are about to get married, she decides to find her long-lost family, and as she goes back to Winnerow, she sort of reconciles with Logan, but because Troy had a fever, so she now caught Troy's fever. Logan has to take care of Heaven, and while they don't exactly rekindle their romance, Logan clearly has feelings for Heaven again, but she is insistent. She is going back to Troy, and comes to find out that Troy is her half-uncle. V.C. Andrews, what did you expect? So then,
heartbreaking.
And yeah, so by the end of Dark Angel, we have Troy, who is Heaven's half-uncle. He commits suicide, and she ends up in the arms of Logan. Eventually, though, true to V.C. Andrews, although we will say some of this, we are going to have eventual discussions about what do we think would have happened if V.C. Andrews had kept the story alive versus the ghostwriter. But what happens in the print that we have is that she ends up still loving Troy, but she ends up with Logan. So, comment below, who do you think is Heaven's true love? But Danielle, who do you think is Heaven's true love, Logan or Troy?
Troy.
Of course you do.
It has to be Troy. I mean, everybody has their first love. And then, I think the main reason that I was okay with her really ending up with Logan was that Annie was really Troy's. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I could justify, that they weren't together, and, she had his baby, whatever. But, I mean, he sacrifices himself. He commits suicide, if you will, so that, she could be free to then go to Logan and have a happy life, which turned out not to be such because Logan's a douchebag, but let's just not go there right now. I mean, twice he was a douchebag.
Oh, absolutely.
Probably more times than that, but we all have our first love, and I think that, that second time around, you know what to expect. It's still like a first love, quote unquote, but, it's, you're more mature. You've been through it before, and, I mean, they spent a lot of time together. I mean, Logan and Heaven did, but there was all the stuff with her family and dealing with all that, and, then she was gone with Cal and Kitty for a while, but I mean, she was at that house with Troy a lot. I mean, they had a lot of time to talk, and I don't know, it's Troy. It's got to be Troy.
Well, I will take the unpopular opinion of saying that I don't know if I think that Troy was Heaven's true love. I think we sort of come to accept in V.C. Andrews' universe that sometimes your true love is somebody you're related to. And right. So I could definitely understand. And I know that a lot of people believe that Troy is Heaven's true love. I also don't know if I necessarily believe that Logan is Heaven's true love. I think he did do some very douchery things, which is clearly the word of the choice. Now, I will say that in the Lifetime adaptations, I came to really enjoy Logan. Yeah. I think it was the actor's performance. He had a certain kind of charm. And I sort of, when I was watching it, I remember having this sort of resistance feeling of like, well, I'm not supposed to want her with Logan. But I kind of want her with Logan over this Troy. I mean, no offense to the actor of Troy.
Right.
Who played it, but we did talk about this in our episodes that we just, it wasn't who we thought. Yeah. So it really does change things. But especially with how Logan turns up in Gates of Paradise, how he's still flirting with Fanny,
Yeah.
still doing these things, again, because it's so misogynistically hypocritical, in my opinion, that he abandons Heaven because he feels like she did something unfaithful to him, and then he goes and cheats on her with her sister, somebody who he hates, and then is still doing it into their adulthood.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't think, like, I kind of thought, we were talking about this beforehand, and I'm like, you know what? Neither. That's my
Yeah.
choice. But then Danielle did bring up a point. And we mentioned in our last episode, Thomas, I'm sorry, we don't know how to pronounce your last name, Franche, but he has also been making some comments below about some interesting theories. And so please, everybody, comment. Let us know. We have I know there's a big VC Andrews community out there, and I do want to know your opinion, and we'd love to hear your theories. We have a long list of theories, and we'll always give credit, but I will say there are a lot that we've already thought about between the two of us. But Thomas did bring up, he's sort of brought up a potential theory for VC Andrews regarding the character of Sarah, but it made me start to think, really, what if VC Andrews, though, had continued the series?
Right.
Would she have resurrected Troy? She ended it that he died, and then in Fallen Hearts, which I know that everybody has their opinion about this, I really think was partially written by VC Andrews and partially written by Andrew Niederman. And I have to wonder, would VC Andrews have brought Troy back? And if she hadn't, we were talking about it and we realized it wouldn't make sense, but you brought up another potential who was Heaven's true love. And if this character hadn't died, I would argue that this was her real true love, as we discovered that he wasn't really related to Heaven in the end. And because I was thinking about it, I'm like, well, that wouldn't, oh my gosh, that is perfect. So Danielle, who do you think is the backup candidate that I now think was Heaven's true love?
I thought it was Tom.
Tom. She was like, Justin, come on, think. Who's the other guy? I'm like, there's nobody else. And it's true, because you do think, like, that's her brother. But then, similar to, like, the Dawn series, where you kind of find out Jimmy has no relation to Dawn, Tom had no relation to Heaven. And of all the sort of brother lovers that are in this series, brother lovers that were or were not related, and
or any kind of familial tie,
right, any sort of incest, of all the brothers, Tom was kind of the best, in my opinion. Selfless, but not like in an insufferable way, not like, oh, he's just so perfect. He was just a good guy. He was selfless. All he wanted was Heaven to be happy.
Well, he had to be the man of the family. When Luke was gone, he had a lot of responsibility when he was young. He knew how Heaven's life was. He knew everything about her, why she was the way she was.
Nobody would ever be able to understand the way that Tom did.
And I just think, like, and I remember even reading them when I was younger, I guess. Part of me, now that we're talking about this, is like, I always kind of thought, in V.C. Andrews land, that you're like, they're going to get together.
Correct, I get it,
like, and then it takes this Troy route, and you're like, oh no, I love Troy, like, she's going to be with Troy. But then you kind of forget about Tom until the whole tragedy happens.
And it's so tragic. It is heartbreaking. It's not on par, I think, with, like, Corey, because Tom did get to have part of his life, but it is one of those sort of defining moments in the Steele series for Heaven. But we talked about in the Lifetime adaptations, one of the things we wish they had focused on more was when they were younger. And, like, I did like the sort of, I cringe a little when I hear it, but also the, like, 13-year-old girl within me is like, I love it when in the Lifetime adaptations, they keep calling each other Fallen Heart, and I'm like, oh, that's gonna be like for Fallen Hearts, and then I'm like, oh, it's so saccharine, so like cheesy, but I love it. And it is true, they call each other Fallen Heart, and but we did hate, I always start a thought and keep going, but basically what I was going to say is that we wish that they had focused more on when they were kids in the adaptations, because they do go through a lot together. Tom and Heaven, like, steal into their neighbor's farm to try and steal food, so they even Fanny kind of, and it's also a sort of redemptive character trait for Fanny, that she also suffered too. And so with Tom, I feel like Tom and Fanny were truly brother and sister, how they were meant to be brother and sister, but Heaven, being placed into the Castile family, I think she was meant to be with Tom, to eventually get the Tatterton money, to be a teacher, and then to be with Tom, and then this horrifying accident happened, which is one of the big defining moments where she wears the blonde hair and all that. But so in the end, I would say tragically Tom was her one true love. You would still say Troy, though? Or has now you're rethinking
I
about
don't know,
Tom?
because I mean,
Because we just thought about it today. Like, yeah, we've never discussed this before.
Never.
And then all of a sudden we're kind of like, Tom.
Yeah.
And it is something that I think we did, like you said, initially when reading the books, knowing it's a V.C. Andrews novel, you're like, oh, they're going to get together.
Yeah, right.
You know, we know it's going to,
right.
and then it didn't. And then she, of course, though, still ends up with somebody who she's related to. But again, in the movies, I'm glad that she ends up with Logan. I think Logan's right until, of course, Gates of Paradise. Even though I think Gates of Paradise is one of the better adaptations, I think we agreed that we didn't really care for the adult cast in that, like the Heaven recasting, the Logan recasting. But the Logan of the first three movies, I thought he did a superb job. So I would argue Logan was maybe her real true love and not Troy. And from the original books, you would say Troy. But now we're sort of in this gray territory over like, wait, Tom, who she's not related to, but who loved her unconditionally, that's who I think was Heaven's true love. But what do you guys think about that? What do you guys think about that theory? What do you guys think in general? Who was, in your opinion, Heaven's true love? Because I know that Troy is sort of we all kind of agree that, yeah, sure. But if you dig a little deeper...
I kind of want to go back and read Dark Angel again, just so I can rekindle my true love.
Because Troy was great, though. I mean, obviously,
he was great.
He had his own narcissistic, way of being where he was so depressed all the time. But he brought a sort of. He was the first person in a long time since Tom to make Heaven feel home again. Because Tony and Jillian sure didn't. Kitty and Cal sure didn't. But Troy did. And, I'm not negating that or invalidating that.
Well, and here's another thing that I wanted to add. I'm thinking about this now. So when we read Flowers in the Attic, it starts off, and Kathy's first love, quote unquote, is her brother. And you're kind of like, what? And then, then there's Julian, who's just a peg. And you're just like, he's such, you can't ever really, he's not likable. And then Paul, okay, weird. Bart, weird. All these, all
See, I disagree. I think Bart is her true love, and we'll maybe do an episode about that.
Let's think about Bart as her mother's husband.
For sure.
Okay? So I loved her and Bart for sure, and I definitely think they should have been together. But in retrospect,
no, I understand what you're saying, and I get it. But I always have to make the comment.
And then you read Heaven, and you're like, Logan's like this, okay, great. This is like a real cool, like not related. This isn't weird. He's just a kid at school. And then he becomes completely douchey. And I think Troy, because obviously we didn't know through the whole book that they were related.
Right.
So when you're like, what? It's like this real romance. Like the first time. And like, we're reading it at 13 and 14. And that's why I'm such a member of Team Troy. You know, because that's the first time, you're really, she's getting older. And, this is her, like, he's 23. So he's like a little risque. And, she's in this big lonely house with these wackadoos. And like, he just brings some normalcy to her life. And finally, after being in Winter Row and dealing like with Luke and just being poor and looked down upon, I don't know, just through the course of reading the books, I mean, this is where I think that's why I am Team Troy. I always will be, because it was the first time we really saw something that we thought was real love until we realized that they were related.
Correct.
You know what I mean? But
and even that didn't stop them in the end. In the end, they ended up coming together to make Annie, because Annie is one of my favorite little daughter characters too from the series. So. But what do you think out there? Who do you think is Heaven's true love? Please comment below. Please subscribe. Thank you for watching another episode of 411 Pop Culture, where real people talk about really everything. Have a good one.
Hold on.
Well, of course.
I was holding it the whole last episode.
So, Yanni Yannerson.
That was a good yawn.
It was. It's going to be contagious, I'm sure. So, all right. 3, 2, 1.
John Amos